Chapter 1. The world of Lord Kalin was a perpetual winter of the soul, a landscape painted in the melancholy gray of forgotten ash and ancient, unforgivable guilt. His sanctuary was a vast, sprawling manor in the Carpathian foothills, a stone mausoleum where every marble pillar and arched, frost-laced window was a silent witness to centuries of solitude. He was a sentinel in a graveyard of his own making, a vampire king whose only true kingdom was the cold, hollow space between one immortal breath and the next. This evening, the silence was broken, not by an enemy's steel or a betrayed lover's cry, sounds Kalin understood, but by a sound utterly foreign to his existence, the frantic, desperate scratching of small hands on the oaken library doors, followed by a voice like a fragile wind chime bell shattering on stone. He rose from his ancestral throne, a dark, liquid shadow uncurling from the armchair where he had been nursing a vintage of human despair and contemplating the futility of his powerful mercy. His movement was a study in unnatural stillness, the very air around him seeming to thicken and absorb the sound of his passage. He reached the door. The voice was clearer now, thin and reedy, yet carrying the crushing weight of a child's ultimate betrayal. "Please, sir, they said you are the king of the night. He locks Mommy in the cold place." Kalin paused, his pale hand hovering over the cold bronze handle. His eyes, usually the color of glacial meltwater, flickered with an internal, sudden combustion of crimson. Children. They were artifacts he had shielded his unlife from, too fragile, too easily broken, their scent of untainted life a profound danger and a profound ache in the vacuum of his existence. He was the lord of the Lex Noctis, the ancient covenant of shadows, a being dedicated to the slow, agonizing maintenance of a delicate balance, and here a human child, barely 5 years of age, was petitioning his terrible power over a domestic squabble. It was absurd, grotesque, and for the first time in 2 centuries, something inside his petrified heart shifted, a quiet, agonizing twist of the old guilt. The little girl's footsteps were unsteady, desperate. Her internal rhythm, the tiny, frantic beat of her mortal heart, vibrated through the dense wood, a profound discord in the otherwise perfect silence of his hall. He opened the door. She was an apparition in the gloom, small enough to be swallowed by the dark fringe of his shadow, her hair the color of midnight dampness, her eyes an impossible, unsettling shade of amber that seemed to hold a light that defied the gloom of the manor and the perpetual twilight of his existence. She was shivering, not just from the bone-deep cold of the mountain night, but from a tremor of profound, exhausted fear. She clutched a tattered doll to her chest. "Lord Kalin," she whispered, her formal address utterly misplaced on her lips. "Stepdad locks Mommy in the basement. He says she is lying about the visions." The words struck him with the force of an unlooked-for lightning strike, the second part of her plea eclipsing the first in its profound, world-shattering implication. Visions. The whispers of prophecy had been silenced for millennia, since the great sundering tore the human world from the supernatural. For a child to speak of them, a child who had somehow crossed the boundary line and found her way to his impenetrable fortress, was not merely a crime against the covenant, it was a seismic tear in the fabric of their ancient reality. His stillness became predatory, a quiet, terrifying focus. He knelt, his marble-smooth skin radiating a cold that promised both death and absolute, terrifying protection. "Little one," he said, his voice a low, formal baritone that seemed to vibrate the very dust from the air. He did not ask her name. A name was intimacy, and intimacy was dangerous. He asked instead, "Tell me what your mother sees." The tension in the air was so thick it was palpable, a tangible pressure pressing down on the small child and the ancient, powerful being. He saw the loneliness in the child's eyes, the the stark reflection of his own eternal solitude, and a wave of fierce, uncharacteristic protectiveness washed over him, a dark, primal tide against the shores of his disciplined despair. He had failed to save one innocent life long ago. This time, the world could shatter first. Chapter 2. The small child, whose name he would later learn was Alara, spoke with the terrifying clarity of the traumatized. She recounted a grim routine of escalating fear and control. The locked door, the thin blankets, the stepfather's cruel, possessive voice. But when she spoke of her mother's sight, her eyes, those unsettling pools of amber, seemed to deepen, reflecting something ancient and immense. She sees the addicta mortis, Alara whispered, the Latin term for the forbidden prophecy falling naturally from her lips as if memorized from an endless, terrified recitation. She sees the marble men rising from the earth to reclaim the sun. Kalen's control, a practiced facade built over 7 centuries of self-hatred, threatened to fracture. The addicta mortis was not a legend. It was the foundational curse of his people, the threat that kept their powerful, exiled race locked in the shadows. The marble men, the ancient, long-vanished, and utterly ruthless Citterans, were the true, primal vampires, beings of pure, unfeeling power who sought not coexistence, but eternal dominion. If one human, a mortal, carried the foresight of their return, the covenant was already compromised. The high-stakes conflict he had sought to avoid for so long was at his doorstep, delivered by the most vulnerable of messengers. He gently placed a hand on Alara's icy forehead. The child did not flinch, only leaned into the unnatural cold, a creature desperate for any anchor in the storm. This simple, intimate contact, a human touch, sent a current of profound, vital energy through him, a stark reminder of the life he was sworn to protect and the life he was forbidden to take. The scent of her blood, pure and terrified, was a heavy perfume in the air, a devastating temptation that only his millennia of iron will could suppress. "Where is your mother, Alara?" His voice was still low, formal, the veneer of the king of the night protecting the deeply conflicted being beneath. He stood, his towering form casting a shadow that enveloped the child entirely, a silent declaration of ownership and defense. His long, black coat, heavier than any earthly material, seemed to absorb the candlelight, making him a walking absence of light. "The cold house, in the town of Viridia," she said, pointing vaguely toward the distant, unseen valley. "He leaves the radio on so no one hears her." Kalen moved toward the armory, his mind already calculating the risk. Viridia, a town within the neutral zones, ostensibly under human rule, but close enough to the boundary line to be patrolled by his own silent, lethal Crimson Guard. To step onto human territory was a breach of the Lex Noctis, a breach that could escalate the fragile peace into an immediate war. But the knowledge held by this woman, the anchor of the prophecy, was too great a weapon to leave in the hands of a mere human tyrant. The burden of his crown was not to rule, but to protect the delicate, dying world from itself. His past failure, the blood of the one he could not save, demanded this choice. He strapped the ceremonial, silver-chased bloodsword to his back. It was an antique, a reminder of the age of open warfare, and usually he hated the weight of it, the symbolic representation of the destruction he was now sworn to prevent. Today, it felt purposeful. He turned to the child who was watching him with wide, unwavering eyes. "You will remain here under the protection of the manor," he stated, his tone brooking no argument. "You will touch nothing, and you will speak to no one. Your mother's safety depends entirely upon your silence." Alara nodded, a solemn, tiny figure in the Gothic expanse. "I know, Lord Kalen. Mommy said the King of the Night is the only one who doesn't believe her visions are lies." Her quiet hope was a devastating weight on his ancient shoulders, a reminder that to some, his monstrousness was their only chance for mercy. He gave a single, curt nod, the promise made and sealed. The king of the night, the lord of the unliving, stepped out of his isolated sanctuary and into the high-stakes dramatic theater of the mortal world. Chapter 3. Viridia was a miserable, forgettable outpost, clinging to the side of the mountain like a patch of mold on a stone wall. Kaelin moved through the night as a sigh of wind, a ripple in the perception of reality. The transition across the boundary line was always a psychological toll. The sudden, overwhelming scent of human mortality, the deafening noise of their restless, dreaming minds. He suppressed it all with the practiced, chilling indifference of a predator moving through a farmyard. His gaze, enhanced to see the very heat signature of life, cut through the night. He found the house instantly, a two-story structure of peeling paint and defeated ambition set back from the road. The basement, the cold place, was a black, lightless pit below ground level, marked by a single, grimy window near the foundation. He approached the house from the rear, his movements less a walk and more a continuous flow of dark silk. He heard the radio first, loud, tinny music attempting to mask the muffled sounds of distress from below. He needed no key, no lock-picking. A single, focused exertion of his will was enough to shatter the wood around the cellar door latch silently, reducing the securing mechanism to dust and splinters. The air in the basement was thick with the smells of mildew, damp earth, and most potently, the raw, metallic scent of fear and the faint, sweet trace of blood. His senses, usually a blessing, were here a curse, forcing him to witness the deep, visceral suffering. He descended into the blackness. He found her huddled in the corner, a woman perhaps 30 years of age, but worn thin by terror and neglect. Serafina was her name, he realized, pulling it from the faint, frantic energy of her consciousness. Her left arm was bruised, the skin already darkening with internal bleedings, and she was shivering uncontrollably, her eyes wide, haunted pools in the faint, ambient light filtering from the broken lock. She was the absolute antithesis of the powerful, inhuman creatures he was surrounded by, yet she possessed a strength that dwarfed their own, the terrifying courage of a mother and the crushing, lonely burden of foresight. She looked up at him, not with the typical human reflex of fear, the paralyzing terror that reduced them to prey, but with an agonizing mixture of relief and recognition. "The king of the night," she breathed, the words a silent promise and a plea. "You are real. The prophecy is not a lie." He knelt beside her, a necessary intimacy that cost him dearly. His powerful, immortal form seemed to consume the space, the proximity an oppressive weight. "The prophecy is terrifying truth, Serafina. You have seen the Citterans return." She nodded, tears tracking clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "I saw the rising. The sun died, and the marble skin, so beautiful, Lord Kaelin, so beautiful, and so utterly cold. They hunger not for blood, but for the extinction of choice." The philosophical depth of her fear was unnerving. The Citterans, the progenitors of his race, were known for their profound, cold nihilism, their belief that free will was the only true pollutant in the cosmos. His purpose was to protect the very concept of choice, the choice to live, to love, to be mortal, a burden he had taken on as penance for his own terrible, unchosen longevity. "I have come to bring you and your child to safety," he stated formally, his hand resting near her bruised arm, a promise of lethal protection. "The knowledge you carry is a weapon, and I will not allow it to fall into the hands of either the human authorities or our ancient enemies." Before she could respond, the heavy footsteps of the stepfather sounded directly above them, cutting off the fragile moment of connection. The man, a brute named Marcus, bellowed, "Serafina, you will not turn that volume down, woman. I swear you make up these lies and—" His voice cut off as he found the main cellar door shattered. Kaelin had less than a heartbeat to react. Chapter 4. Marcus stood silhouetted in the ruined doorway, a pathetic figure made lethal by his assumption of control. His eyes widened, not in recognition of a vampire. He saw only a tall, unnervingly still man in an expensive, anachronistic black coat, but in the sudden, shattering realization that his possession had been challenged. He lunged down the stairs, roaring a generic threat of violence, reaching for the cheap metal pipe he kept hidden near the wall. Kaelin did not move in a sudden flash of supernatural speed, but with a deliberate, chilling grace. This was not a combat. It was a necessary obliteration. His body shifted, not blurring, but becoming unnaturally, impossibly fluid, a living marble statue brought to life. He stepped into the man's path, placing himself entirely between the mortal threat and the fragile human woman. "Silence," Kaelin commanded, the word delivered with such pure, distilled force that it was less a sound and more a sudden, sharp pressure against the man's consciousness. Marcus stumbled, momentarily disoriented, the sudden psychic interference momentarily crippling his clumsy aggression. The pipe swung, a clumsy, mortal attack. Kaelin caught the metal with an open, bare hand. The impact sounded with a dull clang that echoed in the cellar, but the pipe did not bend. It snapped in half, the force of the blow absorbed by skin that was harder than ironwood and colder than a glacier's heart. Kaelin's eyes were now fully crimson, a profound, terrifying reflection of the blood he had suppressed the hunger for. Marcus finally saw the monster, the truth of the being before him. The realization hit him with a visible shock, stripping the bluster from his face, leaving only raw, primal terror. He opened his mouth to scream, a sound Kaelin could not allow, as it would attract unwanted mortal attention and break the covenant further. Kaelin pressed the broken pipe fragment against the man's throat, not with violence, but with the measured, terrifying pressure of inevitable consequence. "You have caused pain to one under my protection. You have silenced the voice of prophecy. For this there is no negotiation, only the ancient law." His voice was devoid of emotion, Aivekal, pronouncement from a judge who had already lived and regretted too many centuries to find pleasure in vengeance. Seraphina watched, not with horror, but with a desolate acceptance. She saw not cruelty, but the terrible justice of a broken world. The man's final, terrified gasp was silent, absorbed by the thick, damp air. Kaelin held the body for a moment, preventing its collapse from making any noise. He then placed the body gently on the cold, earthen floor, a strange, perverse gesture of respect for the dead, and turned back to Seraphina. "It is done. He will trouble you no more," he stated, his crimson eyes fading back to the cold, glacial blue of his usual solitude. The moment of lethal necessity was over, and the crushing weight of his immortal existence returned. Seraphina pushed herself up, clutching her bruised arm. She didn't look at her captor's body. She looked at Kaelin, her gaze unflinching. "You have the mercy of the ancients, Lord Kaelin. The choice of life or death is a heavier burden than any chains." Her words, choice and burden, struck him deeply, hitting the core of his self-imposed penance. He offered his hand. It was pale, long-fingered, and impossibly cold, a hand that promised to hold her firmly, but perhaps never to warm her. She took it, a mortal accepting the cold protection of a powerful, conscience-stricken monster. He pulled her gently to her feet. The immediate, high-stakes action had passed, leaving behind the stark, aching intimacy of shared, lethal secrets. The next step was escape, retreat, and the beginning of a life lived under the shadow of the King of the Night. Chapter 5. The journey back to the manor was silent, a desperate rush against the coming dawn, the ultimate enemy of his kind. Kaelin moved with Seraphina held close, one arm a steel band around her waist, propelling her along at a speed that blurred the landscape into streaks of black and gray. She was surprisingly resilient, her focus entirely on her distant child and the terrifying clarity of her visions. He felt the rapid, unsteady rhythm of her heart against his own unnaturally still chest, a fragile, temporary beat that reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he was now risking to save. As they reached the hidden, ancient archway that marked the true boundary line, Seraphina finally broke the silence, her voice breathy from the exertion but steady. The vision was not only of the Citterans, Lord Kalin, it was also of you. Kalin stopped dead, his grip tightening involuntarily. The cold air grew instantly colder around them. Explain. I saw you standing on a wall of obsidian, facing an army of marble. You did not fight them. You only spoke, and you were not alone. You stood beside a woman of light, a human, and you were not a king, but an anchor. She looked up at him, her amber eyes luminous in the pre-dawn gloom. The prophecy does not name you the destroyer. It names you the final protector, and the human beside you, she was your choice. The words were not flattery or praise. They were a cold, formal pronouncement, challenging the very foundation of his 7-century-long penance. He had resigned himself to a powerful, lonely existence defined by guilt, a vampire whose purpose was merely to enforce a decaying law. The idea of him being an anchor, a chosen point of connection, was a violent rejection of his self-hatred. It was a terrifying responsibility, threatening to drag him back into the intimacy he had forsworn. The prophecies are often metaphorical, Seraphina, he dismissed formally, yet his internal state was a storm of denial and faint, dangerous hope. He remembered the feel of Alara's small hand on his own, the immediate, unthinking trust. The duality of her presence, her fear and her light, was the very choice the prophecy spoke of, the choice to remain a distant, powerful sentinel or to become intimately involved, personally invested, and therefore profoundly vulnerable. The metaphors of prophecy kill. This is literal, she countered, her conviction absolute. Your choice to save a human woman, a seer, will break the final, fatal treaty. They will not tolerate a human with sight being under the protection of the Lex Noctis. You have just declared a war, Lord Kalin, not with a blow, but with an act of mercy. They crossed the archway. The air instantly became stiller, heavier, imbued with the deep, supernatural stillness of his domain. The Gothic sprawl of his manor appeared before them, rising out of the mist like a forgotten cathedral, its frost-laced windows watchful eyes. Inside, Alara was waiting, a tiny, solitary figure in the vast, echoing hall, exactly where he had left her. She ran to her mother, a choked, desperate sound of relief escaping her tiny chest. Kalin watched the reunion from the doorway, the physical distance reflecting the vast, psychological gulf between his immortal world and their fragile, mortal connection. The relief on Seraphina's face, the simple, profound joy of the child, was a sight that was both a terrifying temptation and a profound confirmation of the cost of his choices. He had exchanged a life of safe, lonely solitude for a high-stakes, dramatic confrontation with his own destiny. The prophecy was now a burden on his powerful shoulders, a tangible weight he could not shrug off. He was no longer just the king of the night. He was an agent of the inevitable. Chapter 6. The following night, the manor was transformed from a monument to solitude into a fortress preparing for a siege. Kalin had dispatched the swiftest of his Crimson Guard to monitor the neutral zones and had summoned his trusted, taciturn lieutenant, Lord Lucian. Seraphina and Alara were housed in the eastern wing, rooms he had kept closed for centuries, now suddenly alive with the faint, comforting sounds of human movement. He stood in the library, looking out at the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks, his marble-smooth skin reflecting the deep blue of the night. Lucian entered, his movements economical and respectful. Lucian was his mirror and his opposite, ancient, loyal, and utterly without the burdensome morality that crippled Kaelin's decisive action. "The human stepfather is found," Lucian reported, his voice a low, formal rasp. "The human authorities are calling it a disappearance. Our presence in Viridia remains undetected, but the whispers have begun, sire. The knowledge of the seer is spreading through the ancient lines." "The whispers are irrelevant. It is the action that matters," Kaelin stated, turning to face his lieutenant. "We prepare for the arrival of the Council of Three. They will demand the surrender of the woman as a breach of the Lex Noctis." The Council of Three represented the highest, most conservative authority of the vampires, beings who saw Kaelin's powerful mercy as a dangerous weakness. "And if they demand it, my lord?" Lucian asked, his eyes the color of wet slate, fixed on Kaelin's face. Kaelin walked to the immense fireplace, placing his hand against the cold stone mantel. The contrast of his cool skin against the chilling marble was a physical metaphor for his internal conflict. He had spent his centuries maintaining the stasis of the Covenant. Now he was preparing to shatter it, driven by a child's tear and a woman's frightening truth. "We will refuse," Kaelin said, his voice quiet, formal, and utterly final. "Seraphina is not a prisoner. She is under my hospitium sacra, my sacred protection. Her vision of the Citterans is not a lie. It is the truth the Council is too cowardly to face. To surrender her is to surrender the last, lonely chance to prepare for the true war." Lucian bowed his head, accepting the declaration of war against their own kind with the loyalty of a soldier. "And the child, Ilara? What is her role in this high-stakes folly?" Kaelin's eyes softened momentarily as he thought of the little girl, her amber eyes reflecting his own loneliness. "The child is the heart of the mother, Lucian. She is a reminder that the world we seek to protect is one of light and choice, not merely one of dark power. She is the proof of the prophecy's worth." A sudden sound interrupted the grim strategy session. Seraphina stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around a thin blanket, her expression a mix of shame and resolute fear. "My lord Kaelin, I do not want the price of my life to be a civil war in your own ancient kingdom. I will go to the council. I will tell them I lied. I will take the consequences." Kaelin crossed the distance between them in 2 fluid strides. He placed his hands on her shoulders, the cold pressure penetrating her blanket and skin, a promise of absolute control and absolute defense. This was the intimacy he had feared, the complete life and death vulnerability of the other. "You will do no such thing, Seraphina," he stated, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a tone more dangerous than any shout. His gaze was intense, forcing her to hold his eyes, the glacial blue a testament to his unbreakable will. "Your life is no longer your own to offer in sacrifice. It belongs to the prophecy. I have made my choice, a costly one made long ago, which I now choose to honor with my current action. You and your daughter are the anchor in the coming storm. I may be the king of the night, but tonight I am only your protector." He held her gaze until she finally gave a small, defeated nod. The profound silence of the manor returned, now heavy with the weight of the coming conflict. The king of the night had accepted his true burden, trading his isolation for the high-stakes, deadly intimacy of protecting the human prophet and her child. The war, both internal and external, had just begun.